Welcome to Ancient Faith Today Live. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Montushka Trudy will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. Now, you can also send us a text message right from your phone, and that's been a really popular way to interact with us and with the guest. You can send us a text message to 412-206-5012. That's right. Write it down, 412-206-5012. You can also participate online. If you go to the AFM Facebook and YouTube pages, you can make comments right in the threads there. And of course, as always, you can send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. When people think of the Orthodox Church, they automatically think of icons and iconography. Icons are ubiquitous in our church, and of course, we are going to be celebrating the triumph of orthodoxy, which is really the triumph of iconography and the use and veneration of icons in the Orthodox Church. However, lately, among the apologetic streams within Catholicism and Orthodoxy and Protestantism, there has been some challenges to the veneration of icons. And of course, that topic is nothing new. Those who do not believe in the veneration of icons is certainly nothing new. Much of radical Protestantism is very much iconoclastic, and so this doesn't come as a great surprise. However, it is asserted, or it's being asserted, that some of the scholarship doesn't support early Orthodox veneration of icons. And so we're here to dispel that myth, but also to talk about some of the theological issues regarding Orthodox icons and their veneration. Frankly, when I assess what I've read and what the videos that I've watched over the last few months, I am absolutely convinced that the critics don't understand the Orthodox version, the Orthodox understanding of the Incarnation, the Orthodox understanding of the creation story, the Orthodox understanding of the reason for the commandment against idolatry, and of course, they don't understand the nature of idols themselves. To say that Orthodox veneration of icons is idolatry, in fact, betrays a total misunderstanding of what idolatry is. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We want you to call in. We want you to challenge. We want to hear what you have to say about this. And we have as our guest an outstanding scholar. Father Stephen Bigham is an Orthodox priest from Quebec. He completed his doctorate in the field of Christian art at the University of Montreal in 1989. He was a lecturer of theology, ethics, and philosophy at the University of Sherbrooke in Orthodox theology. He's published several important studies on the history of iconography and iconology, including the titles Early Christian Attitudes Toward Images and The Image of God the Father in Orthodox Theology and Iconography. And we're going to let you know how you can download those works. We're going to talk about that at the end of the show tonight. Father Stephen Bigham, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a great honor. And I did hear you on a YouTube stream, and it was very interesting. What I'm going to out the whole argument, right? We want to talk about what is the history of an icon of icons in the early church as you have come to study it and write about it and understand it. But then also we want to talk a little bit about what is the difference between idols and icons, because there seems to be a lot of bad understanding and bad theology out there. And then we'll talk about iconoclasm and so forth. So I want to start with this. How did you personally, how did you become involved in the study of the history and the theology of icons?
Yes, it was actually by accident. I was back in the 80s, 1980s. I was in a parish, and someone just started to explain an icon, and I thought that was really very interesting. And I carried on reading. And when I went to St. Vladimir's for a year in 1982, 83, I decided to do a thesis on death and dying. There was a course given by Father Schmemann on death and
Oh
dying,
my.
and I took that course. And so I thought, well, how is death shown in icons? And I wrote that. And after that, it was just continuing on. I did, as you mentioned, PhD in Christian iconography, and it's just I haven't stopped since. And here we are tonight talking about my favorite subject.
Well, we're glad that you did because, who would have known that this would be a kind of a controversial subject? I think in history, obviously, there have been times of great controversy, but they had a sort of a historical context, right? You had the
Yes.
rise of Islam, and so it was sort of very logical. But today, for whatever reason, this subject has come up again. And I know that the internet has a way of magnifying small voices, right? That's maybe the
Yes.
bad part of the internet is there's a lot of mice stirring about this particular issue. However, it would be important for us to kind of reassert why this is important, especially in light of us being in the first week of Great Lent and approaching the Sunday of Orthodoxy. So let's start with this, Father. Can we look at first how do we understand as Orthodox Christians this verse from, and it's in both Exodus and Deuteronomy, in the Ten Commandments, about the prohibition of making idols, right? Like,
Yes.
what is the purpose of that? Why did God command that idols should not be made?
Because he doesn't have any rivals. He doesn't want to have any rivals. He's a very jealous God. We read that. He wants no false gods or no little nothings beside him. And he requires us to worship him and him alone. So the commandment was given that no image of one of these false gods, or even an image of him, or of anything else that claims to be a god, should be made and should be worshipped. Now, it's very important because it's on this point that we divide. Does the second commandment exclude all images? Are all images, all religious images, idols? Or, and therefore obviously bowing down before them that's idolatry. Or that's usually certainly the iconoclastic argument, and a lot of Protestant people also take that point of view. However, the Orthodox point of view is that the second commandment certainly prohibits the making of idols and the worshiping of them, but that is idolatrous art. But it says nothing about non-idolatrous art. And it's on the basis of that very fundamental distinction. It's the distinction between veneration and worship. It's on that basis of that we Orthodox have built our tradition of making images, making icons, and of venerating them.
So explain what you mean by non-idolatrous art.
Well, just think of the temple, Solomon's temple. There were a lot of images in there. First off, there were the seraphim with on the ark. There were bulls. There were lions. There were other other images in the Old Testament, especially in the temple. And we read about various objects, various images of things in the sky, on the earth, and under the earth, that were not worshipped and were not considered to be idols. Now, the problem with taking a very rigorous, one-dimensional interpretation of the Second Commandment is that you right off immediately, you run into the problem of why does God command the making of a serpent, for example, in the Old Testament there with Moses,
Right.
If all images are idols. And you go all the way through the Old Testament, and there where we see about images that are non-idolatrous. Obviously, all idols are to be destroyed. And you get then into the Christian era, and what about Christian images? Well, if you
Right.
start off with a one-dimensional definition of the Second Commandment, then you've got the whole problem. How do you explain the fact that the Christians adopted and adapted images practically from the beginning, and that the whole artistic tradition, even in Protestant churches, so you have lots of images. How is it that you can justify those images, usually stained glass windows, if you take the radical interpretation of the Second Commandment that it prohibits all religious images? You have to jump through so many intellectual hoops to reconcile that interpretation simply with the Bible itself and with church history and Christian art.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring up 2 points that you talked about, one comment and one question. We were very fortunate to have a previous guest talk about this particular issue from a biblical standpoint. And, even among Orthodox Christians, I got this sort of like pushback or blowback because I called the show, I said, is icon veneration biblical? And they were like, oh, why are you using the Protestant terms? And we don't care if it's biblical or whatever. I'm like, well, then you know nothing about church history. I mean, all of the councils, all of the, even the arguments that St. John of Damascus and St. Theodore and all of the writings, they all discuss this from a biblical standpoint. When they were discussing the divinity of Christ, they're all discussing this from a biblical standpoint. You have to approach this from a biblical standpoint also. And so, the one thing that I was going to say is, you brought up this idea of, well, God does not want idolatry. It says very carefully, take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
And so the idea, as you're saying, is we now see Jesus, right? We see a form.
We see a form. Yes, before the Incarnation, any attempt to make an image of God, that's idolatry, obviously. But in the Incarnation, our argument, and the historical church argument, the councils too, was that before the Incarnation, absolutely impossible to make an image of God. But after the Incarnation, when the Logos, the Son of God, invisible before Nazareth, he now is visible as a real human being. He has real human features, and that one of those is visibility. I haven't yet met an invisible man or woman. So part of being a real human being is that you're visible. Otherwise,
Right.
something's fishy. And if you are visible, then they could take a picture of you. I mean, there were no cameras back at that time, but they did have painting and drawings. And so, if someone draws a picture, an image of Jesus, then that what you're drawing is those visible aspects of his human nature. And if you say that you cannot do that, then you end up being in the Docetist meaning that
Right.
you say that Jesus only looked like a man, he seemed like a man, but he really wasn't. But no, our answer, the Orthodox answer, he was fully human, and he wasn't just appeared to be a man, but he really was one, and therefore we can draw his picture. Now, the in the let's say the first 3 centuries, we have certain indications that um pictures of Jesus were drawn, and even I suppose in the catacombs, and the earliest image that is really datable with certainty is a half picture. It's cut off, been destroyed, in Dura Europos, that city on the Euphrates that was discovered in the
Mm-hmm.
early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
1920s. First off, they discovered a synagogue, and guess what was in the synagogue? All the
Mm-hmm.
walls were painted with biblical
Mm-hmm.
stories. I mean,
Right.
at the time, well, Jews didn't have any images, did they? No, of course not. Well, there they discovered a synagogue where all the walls were painted with biblical images. Now, whoa! So that gave everybody, those who want to have a sort of limited interpretation of the second commandment. Well, how do you explain that? And some people said, well, they must be heretical Jews. Okay, but then all the way through
Mm.
the 20th century in Israel, they've been digging up synagogues with floors and all kinds of images. So this whole notion that Jews and the early Christians, I call it the hostility theory,
Right.
that the Jews and early Christians were aniconic. They didn't have any images, and they
Mm-hmm.
were iconophobic, that meaning they were afraid of them or against them because
Yeah.
of the second commandment. That just doesn't hold any water
Yeah, can you
anymore.
go into that, Father, a little bit? Because I know that's really your wheelhouse. Is you wrote a whole book on this idea of the hostility theory. So, what do you mean by the hostility theory, and what in terms of your research, what does it actually show of the attitude toward images by early Christians?
Yes, the hostility theory, as I call it, that's my word, means that the Jews in general and the early Christians, because they were converts to from Judaism, they were all, I use those two words, aniconic. They had no images, and they didn't want to have them because the second commandment forbids all religious images. That was a general theory that you can hear if you pick up almost any uh, art history book that talks about early Christian and Jewish images or art. Somewhere along the line, they will talk about this theory. There was a change somehow in the early church. You know, the church was paganized. Too many pagans came
Right.
in, and they lost the purity of the apostles who had no
Right.
images. Uh, and so that's the basic theory, hostility theory. Now, both started really with archaeology, as I said, with Dura Europos and that synagogue, and then there was a baptistry in a Christian house, a house church that was discovered just down the street, uh, and it was in the baptistry. It was had drawings and paintings, frescoes on it too. And there is an image of Jesus holding out his hand to Peter, who's sinking
Mm,
down into the sea. Now it's been the
mm.
image of Jesus has been cut off due to destruction over nearly 20 centues. But we
Right.
can see, obviously, it was an image of Jesus, and that is datable to 250, 256. The city was destroyed, so it was before. It was done before that. So that's I think the earliest clearly datable image of Jesus. So that's the archaeology. Then people who are adherents to the hostility theory, they try to interpret the literature from the first 3 centuries as being anti-image and anti all images. They have a very rigorous interpretation of the second commandment. And so there was a German fellow about 1917. He made a study, and that was the basis of my doctoral studies. I wanted to go back and see if how accurate he was. But he made a list. He quoted all the various writers in the first 3 centuries, and said,
Right.
"Listen, oh look, they're against images or talking about
Uh-huh.
images." Well, if we have to be a little bit
Right.
honest here, if you go back and reanalyze nearly all of those pre-Constantinian authors, they're
Hmm.
all talking about idolatry, idols. Well, so what's new or about Jews and Christians being against idols? But those documents say absolutely nothing about an non-idolatrous art, images that can be used for the purposes of proclaiming the Christian faith or even the Jewish faith. Uh, we have many mentions in Jewish the Talmuds that the Jews had images, and that in their synagogues, and that the rabbis didn't prohibit them. Obviously, they didn't think they were idols. I mean, you
Yeah,
couldn't
I
have an
do find it very I do find it very fascinating that the Judaism of today is always appealed to as representative of the Judaism of 2,000 years ago, which history shows that that's simply not the case, right?
Yes, I mean,
So
you,
it's a totally different, situation. So I wonder what it was or what influence there was. This might be sort of out of our subject today, that caused Judaism to be so iconoclastic, where
well,
when in fact the archaeology and the history shows that they used images.
it's you have to be careful of that word iconoclastic. Does iconoclastic, well, we're not talking about the Byzantine part, but in general, were the Jews on principle against all religious images before Christ and after Christ in the synagogues? And I just don't think you can make that argument with any credibility that
Right.
Jews did not have a category of non-idolatrous art that could be used either to decorate or for religious purposes to illustrate the Bible. That just doesn't hold water anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
And so, from the literary point of view, rereading and interpreting the Jewish texts and the early Christian text in our terms of a very fundamental distinction between idolatrous art and non-idolatrous art, uh, and so it's on that basis that the early Christians. Now, we have to also be honest here and straight. There is no command either in the New Testament. Jesus didn't command, or the apostles didn't command that images be made. So how is it? In the New
Right.
Testament is silent on the question. So how
Mhm.
is it that we ended up with a Christian artistic tradition in our icons? Well, it's my position. I don't think just mine, but I say it, that the the early Christians went out into the Greco-Roman world, and they had, uh, even if it wasn't expressed, they had this notion that it was possible to have non-idolatrous images. And so when they went out into the Greco-Roman world and they saw the power of an image is a very
Mhm.
powerful thing,
Mhm.
and they looked, the good shepherd, that's a perfect example. They went out
Right.
into the Roman world and they saw that the pagan Romans and Greeks had this image of a man carrying a sheep, and that's a very ancient image in the Greco-Roman world. Its origin is not Christian at all. But if you're a Christian and you're walking around in Rome or in the Roman world someplace, and you see what this is called a creophorus, the man carrying a sheep, what are you going to think of? Well, it's
Right.
pretty obvious that you're going to think of the good shepherd. Jesus is the good shepherd.
Right.
And so they said, well, now we can use that. We can use that. We can take that image and bring it into the church and baptize it. Not in the
Mhm.
real sense of in the water,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we can
Sure.
we can bring it into the church and incorporate it into our preaching, so that we preach by the word and also by images. And many other images were and the whole work of making images was adapted into the church and we say this as a tradition. It's not a command from Christ. Perfectly
Mhm.
correct. It is something that the church in her historical journey saw as a powerful instrument that she could not really uh, do without. And so these images were adapted into the church. Christians adapted them and adopted them and then adapted them to be instruments of proclaiming the gospel. And
Right. Right.
go ahead.
Father, let me just interrupt you. That's very, very helpful. I want to, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come
Okay.
back, I want to talk about sort of the next step of that. I do want to touch a little bit on some of these Christian writers. You were talking about what they were talking about, like, with icons. So whether it was Origen, Eusebius, Epiphanius, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, who, sort
All
of
the
were
fellows.
not, yeah, were not favorable toward images and kind of what they, what was going on there. And then I do want to turn to the idea of veneration,
Yes. Uh-huh.
veneration of
Hmm.
images, because this really seems to be the point where I think number one, every time we have somebody come into the church, especially if they are former Protestants, that's kind of the last shoe to fall.
Yes.
They are fine with everything, but they feel very uncomfortable with venerating images, and then eventually that goes away. So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about also the idea of images, not simply as a kind of a depiction, but maybe even, when we venerate this image, that the honor goes to the prototype and what we're actually doing here. So let's talk
Hmm.
about some of that
Yes.
theology. So hold on tight. We're going to come right back. we want you to give us a call. Give us a call at 1-855-AF-RADIO or send us a text message to 412-206-5012. We're talking with Father Stephen Bigham. We're talking about iconography, the veneration of icons in the history of the church, why we do it, how we do it, when we started doing it. You are listening to Ancient Faith Today, and we will be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
New from Ancient Faith Publishing. Sands of Salvation, the Strength of Abba Moses. Freedom, power, strength, these he would gain, then lose. Released from slavery and no longer frightened by his master's whip, Moses uses his new freedom and great physical strength to rob and destroy. Consumed by his own desires and unable to escape the reminders of his past, Moses must learn of the true source of freedom and power. Meet Saint Moses the Strong, also known as Saint Moses the Black, as he surpasses his physical strength with spiritual discipline, obtaining the crown that thieves can neither harm nor steal. Sands of Salvation, the Strength of Abba Moses. A graphic novel by Gabriel Wilson is now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
We're speaking with Father Stephen Bigham, and we're talking about the veneration of icons. Father Stephen, we had a message come in through our text line, 412-206-5012, and the message is from Christy. It says, how do we explain to non-Orthodox Christians that icons aren't just a nicety, a decoration, they're not just an option, but are actually necessary for us to proclaim the Incarnation?
Yes, I would say that icons, but then I wouldn't limit this just to icons, but I would say any image. Our definition of an image, and that's, I would say it's not particular to us, but we have a very definite theology of what an image is. And an image is an artistic image, is a painted, a drawn picture of some person, and we call that object, that objet d'art, the thing, we call that a typos, or a type. Now, there is a real person behind that drawing, and that person is called a prototypos, or a prototype. Now, even if you have a photo of your beloved grandmother who died some time ago, you would not appreciate it if I were to take that photograph and draw horns on it and give her a mustache and a beard and put a swastika on it, or some other thing, or somehow deface that image. The person would react what are you doing? Maybe even get very mad and attack me. Now, why is it that a piece of wood product with chemicals and colors on it, why would that person get upset if I somehow defaced that picture? Well, and here that gets right into our theology of the relationship between a typos, a type of the actual picture, and the person represented. That there is what we call a relationship between the typos and the prototypos, your real grandmother and the picture of Granny, such that if I deface Granny's picture, I am, in your mind and in everybody's mind, I am defacing and insulting Granny. And now this is, everybody is aware of this. No, doesn't matter how iconoclastic you are, if they will, if you have a picture, if you have a photograph of somebody and you desecrate that, then that you are desecrating the person. That just is very good, because that just proves our point, that there is a relationship between the drawn or painted picture and the actual person. Now, everybody agrees on the negative part. Well, we take it on the positive part, and we say, well, because of that relationship between the typos and the prototypos, that we can not only insult the person, but we can honor the person. And if you honor a photograph of someone in some way, that honor, that respect goes to that person. I mean, look at, I just, there was some of the people who were killed recently in Syria, or and other places in Ukraine there too. And the mothers usually have a picture of someone near the grave, and that person, they're her son, who's dead, and she kissed that picture. I mean, have you or any other people who are listening, have you ever kissed your grandma's picture and said, "Oh, Grandma, I love you so much. I miss you so much, and I give you a big kiss, and I love you"? I mean, would anybody in his right mind say that is idolatry? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. That's too crazy a thing to. Well, if I can, or you or anybody can kiss a picture of Granny, why can I not kiss a picture of the Lord himself? And by my kissing his icon, his image, well, I am then giving honor to his picture, and that honor goes up to him. I am honoring him. The same thing as if, when, let's say, the Muslims in various places have, or others, have desecrated icons in the churches. Well, that's, they're desecrating Christ. And if we have in mind that notion, which in its negative aspect is universal, everybody accepts it, in its positive aspect, that's our whole the foundation of what we call veneration. Now, veneration, I mean, a lot of iconoclastically oriented folk get all out of joint when we talk about veneration. And
for sure,
I think
absolutely,
yeah. And the reason it goes back to the whole notion of bowing down, the second commandment, bowing down.
Yeah,
you can't
proskinesis, right? Yeah,
proskinesis. You can't bow down to a typos, any kind of a objet d'art, a picture of anything. That is idolatry. Well, we don't. We make that very clear distinction between bowing, not only the making of images, that's one thing, but also the bowing down or the giving of honor. Now, giving honor to a picture or a photograph or whatever, a portrait, that can be done. That's a very culturally oriented thing.
Yeah. And actually, Father, I want you to hold on to that thought just for 1 second, because that part I really want to explore that, because I think if people are going to be honest, I think there is a cultural issue here that somehow people that are uncomfortable with showing that type of respect through a kiss, specifically kissing an object, are always going to have that block until they understand. I want to go back to your idea of typos, the type, right?
Yeah.
Now, you said that you studied under Father Alexander Schmemann.
Yes.
And, Father Alexander wrote about, he used the term symbol, right? And he said that people, the modern understanding of symbol is illustration. Like a symbol is there just to teach, just to illustrate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his writing says this. So if you don't mind, tell me if this kind of resonates with the icon also. He says, the primary meaning of symbol is in no way equivalent to illustration. In fact, it is possible for the symbol not to illustrate, i.e., it can be devoid of any external similarity with that which it symbolizes. The history of religion shows that the more ancient, the deeper, the more organic a symbol, the less it will be composed of such illustrative qualities. This is because the purpose and function of the symbol is not to illustrate. This would presume the absence of what is illustrated, but rather to manifest and to communicate what is manifested. We might say that the symbol does not so much resemble the reality that it symbolizes as it participates in it, and therefore it is capable of communicating it in reality. So now, of course, he's always writing in terms of the Eucharist, right? And he says, this bread and this wine, they are symbols in this ancient sense. They're not symbols in the modern Western sense of they stand for something else, but they are symbols in that this is what we use to actually receive the body and blood of Christ. We are actually receiving the body and blood of Christ, but the only way we can do it is through bread and wine. We're not going to chew on his flesh, right? On his arm or something.
We're not cannibals. Yeah.
And so this is the way that this is done. This is the reality. And are icons then somehow also this, that when we give this veneration, the symbol of this icon allows to actually participate somehow in the reality of that relationship?
Yes, I would certainly say that. When you have a definition of what the typos is, it's not obvious, and the iconoclasts said that in order for there to be a true image, that the typos and the prototypos, the actual art object, and the actual person represented, have to be consubstantial. And therefore, the only real image of Jesus is the bread of communion, which is which is his body and blood. Of course, we rejected that, or we, the fathers of the council, totally rejected that notion of an image, because the picture of my grandma and grandma herself, they're very different in nature. One is paper, the other is a human being. But nonetheless, through an image which represents the visible parts of that person, we do, right. And this relationship does connect us to that person, so that right. It's a two-way street. We can honor that person through various gestures or words, and we believe that person also, because the image and icons have been incorporated into the mystery of the church, that person also we can have communion with that person through the image. But the veneration is simply showing honor, and the right. actual and the physical gesture by which we do that can vary and is really quite arbitrary.
There it is. There it is. And that's what I wanted to get to, is help us understand, because it seems like the kiss itself is sometimes distant from people, right? Like some of them are like, why would you do that? Why would you kiss this piece of wood, right? And
Well,
so talk a little bit about what veneration means and how it is done and the various ways in which it is done.
If someone's said that to me, I would bring up the notion of Granny's picture. Have you ever imagined? Have you ever seen anyone give a kiss to the picture of their grandma? I mean, most people would not recoil. Oh, what a horrible thing that would be. They would perfectly be able to do that. So why then transferring it from a picture of Granny to the Lord Himself? Why would that be a problem? But even so, the whole notion of the gestures, the physical gestures that we can make before an image, those have varied and can vary, across time and across centuries. Look at, I mean, I would bet that in Japan, most of the people bow, in front of an icon. Maybe really, like they make an L out of themselves. Very low bow. We do that too, but that's culturally dependent on Japan. Okay, if someone
Agreed.
does not want, if a convert does not want to kiss the icon, okay, so don't kiss the icon. But you for whatever reason, I mean, they would not be able to say, well, I'm not kissing the icon because that's idolatrous. No, you couldn't say that and still be Orthodox. But if you have another way you want to honor the image of Christ or Mary, the saints, okay, pay your money and take your choice. The thing is not to impose. We don't impose, although there's a tradition, there are things that are done. But if someone doesn't want to do that, all right, so don't do that. Do something else. But
yeah, I want to say here that I think the cultural issue is very, very important. And I am not suggesting, and I know you're not suggesting, that we go to our parish tomorrow and not kiss icons, right? I think that this is kind of the normative way that we do this.
We're used to doing that.
But I think this is a really important point. I think that Christians that say, well, I don't need to show any physical gestures to honor that, to honor God. And I would say, oh, yes, you do. In fact, the very anthropology of a human being made in the image of and likeness of God shows that you must, in order to honor God, that's that word proskinesis, you have to bow down, right? Like there is, you can't just be this disembodied spirit and say, well, I'm just going to do this in my mind. You have to show some physical reverence to God, right? And that's the way you do that, is you physically show some kind of reverence through the act of veneration, whatever that act happens to be.
Yes. I mean, that's one of the advantages or strong points of our liturgy, is that it calls upon all the aspects of a human being to physical gestures, smelling, sight, everything. The whole person is involved in worship. But the people who, and it's usually not a question of, I don't like to give kisses to pictures, but there's a theological component to that too, and that is that it's wrong. Somehow it's wrong to do that. But that all goes back to the interpretation of the second commandment. The second commandment. If you separate the honoring of something with the worshiping of something. Worship, and those two words in our tradition, going back to Nicaea too. If you don't make an absolute distinction between those two things, worshiping, which is only for God, and honoring, respecting, showing some kind of, when you stand up in court when the judge comes in, I mean, that's proskinesis?
Exactly.
When you salute the flag, you stand up if the president, you bow to the king. What else are all the other? Is general, if a general goes by, you're a soldier, you salute. I mean, the examples are numerous in our culture of a physical gesture showing respect to an object. We are not, I mean, English, Anglo-Saxon in tradition, we're not too strong on the kissing part, but okay, so let's not make that into a big deal. If you don't want to kiss him, don't do it, but do something else. I mean, Anglicans bow to the altar. I mean, what's the problem with bow to the cross when it goes by? I mean, if you're gonna really take that strict interpretation of the second commandment, that's idolatry. Whoa.
Right.
Who's gonna? Well, you don't want to say that, but there it is, a physical gesture that shows honor to an object.
Father,
yeah.
I want to ask you one more question, because we're coming near to the end of the show, and I appreciate all of your knowledge and the way that you've explained everything. It's very, very helpful. So you had mentioned, because I want to acknowledge somehow, right, that there is a kind of, when we use an icon and we honor the person or worship the God depicted in that icon, that is not being given to that wood, it's passing to the prototype, right? So we understand that is a rule for us. Now,
yes,
you had mentioned the bronze serpent. Now,
yes,
that sometimes they call it that Nehushtan, right? And in the scriptures, Hezekiah actually destroys this bronze serpent, right?
Yes.
Is there a lesson for us there at all? Because sometimes, you're very sort of fundamentalist and iconist Protestants will say, but look, in the bronze serpent, the Jews went too far and they were worshiping it as God, just like you worship your icons, and it had to be destroyed, right?
Yeah.
So is there a legitimate lesson there in the Old Testament regarding the bronze serpent?
Sure, there's a very good example, and it totally undercuts their entire argument. And that, what do you do about this bronze serpent before it became an idol? Well, God commanded it first off, and it was used to heal the people who were bitten by snakes. So there's a whole, I don't know how many centuries before Hezekiah, that the serpent existed. It was a non-idolatrous image, and very good. And then what happened? The Jewish people, the Israelites there, they decided that they were going to worship it, and not simply use it as a non-idolatrous art, but they decided to worship it, and Hezekiah destroyed it, and bravo for him. Great. Anything that is worshipped, is an idol, and for Christians and Jews and Muslims too, you got to get rid of that. You cannot have that. So I would say, that's.
So what's
great.
the lesson? What's the lesson for us regarding iconography specifically?
In reference to the serpent?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it is that if we use if we use images, icons, in the church's understanding and the way we're supposed to, distinguishing between worship and venerating and honoring something, then we have no problem. If by chance, I've never heard of this, but if some Orthodox person begins to worship an icon, it's hard to even imagine what that would even be like. But if they did that, well, then they'd have to be corrected or chased out, and the image, I'm not sure what we would do with it. But if you the serpent is a very good. It's our strong point. Actually, it's not a point for them, but it's a point for us. That when we distinguish what the Council of Nicaea distinguished, the absolute distinction between latria and proskinesis, worship, which only goes to God, and honoring, which only goes to persons and objects that are worthy of honor, whatever the physical manifestation of that is. If we maintain that, then we're home free.
Excellent. Father Stephen, thank you so much for all of your knowledge and your wealth of information. Talk to us a little bit about your books. Now, you have some just killer books. The Image of God the Father in Orthodox Theology and Iconography. You have Christians and Images, Early Christian Attitudes Toward Images, Epiphanius of Salamis, Doctor of Iconoclasm, ? Destruction of a Myth. All of your books are online, right? You can actually download your books.
Yes, and for free. For free. If somebody wants
to... Tell us how to do that.
Okay. Go to Google. Everything's to Google. Go to Google and punch in SMASH, SMASH, words, WORDS, all together. Punch that in, and then that platform, that ebook platform will come up. Put in my name, S. Bigham, and they're all there. And you can, I have let the buyer, in quotes, the buyer, determine the price from nothing up to $10,000. Most people take the zero option, which is okay. You don't.
No, well, you should.
We don't get rich
worth
doing
your
this.
labor. Well, we're encouraging our listeners to go to Smashwords, type in Stephen Bigham, and download your works. You have them in French and you have them in English.
Some of them,
but
yes.
Yeah, but give Father what he is due. That it costs some money to. It costs some money to get that education, so we want Father to also enjoy a little bit of the fruit of his labor. Father Stephen Bigham, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. We hope that you'll come back. Have a blessed Lent and a joyful Pascha.
And the same to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. Before I share a few final thoughts, I want to again offer my sincere thanks to Father Stephen for joining us tonight. Thanks to Matushka Trudy for engineering the program, to our show production assistant, Melissa Graff, for her work behind the scenes, for everybody that's listening in, and for those who will be listening. Just wanted to read a couple of the hymns that we have on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. You know, it's coming up, and this is really very, very important. For instance, one of the hymns says, "Grace and truth have shone forth. The predictions of old have been clearly fulfilled. Behold, the church adorns herself with the form of Christ incarnate. The icons of the new creation transcend the adornments of the old. As the Ark of the Covenant held the presence of God, so now The icons reveal the presence of the one we adore. By honoring them, we will never go astray. It is our glory to fall down and worship Christ in the flesh. Come, O faithful, venerate his image and cry out, O Lord, save your people and bless your inheritance. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.